Okay, so today is the 14th day of Shvat, the 12th of January, and we ended last time just about coming to this interesting historical part of the development of Kabbalah that people are not usually aware of. So we're talking about the fact that when we say tzivanu, in every bracha that we say tzivanu, that's the yesod. That is the yesod Abba, or the foundation. And like the organ of procreation, it's what causes the connection. It's what makes two things one. So then he says, וכמו שכתוב גם כן בפרי עץ חיים, לרב יוסף מערב, this is what he calls him, יוסף מערב, בדרוש הלולב, ממשל ברית קודש שמגיע בו, שכשמגיע בו, מתעורר כללות הגוף עם המוח שבראש. So, he says there's in Pri Etz Chaim. Pri Etz Chaim is a collection from the writings of the Arizal. It's not from Rav Chaim Vital. It's from Reb Meir Paprish was his name, and he was part of the Ashkenazic Kabbalistic tradition. And he collected from everywhere that he knew. He collected together the different intentions that we do during prayer, during the yearly cycle. He was very interesting, Meir Paprish. He actually, I think I've talked about this before. He was so interested in hearing what Rav Chaim Vital had actually learned. I think he was born after the Rabbi passed away, so he couldn't have heard it. But he went to Damascus to learn from him. And at the time, Rav Chaim Vital was teaching every Shabbos. He had his notes, and he would teach. And apparently he would teach basically verbatim from what he had written down. And Reb Meir Paprish was there for a whole year or 2 years, I don't know how long, and he listened and they had great memories then. The Mamish remembered word for word what people said. So he afterwards, and there were a lot of writings around, and I've talked about this, that Rav Chaim Vital was never able to satisfactorily, in his eyes, organize what the Arizal had said. And so he never published anything. Nothing was ever published in his lifetime. And he did one version of what we call Eitz Chaim, then he did another version of Eitz Chaim. He published neither. His son began to publish, but most of what was published until about 10, 15 years after the Rav Chaim Vital passed away was stuff that was stolen from him. Meaning, it was different types of stealing. Yeah, people stole the manuscripts, brought them back, all kinds of, especially when he was sick, they were able to put their hands on it. But he never felt that he had organized things properly, so he didn't want to publish it. But Meir Paprish did, and he wrote the book that we today call Eitz Chaim, which is actually not Eitz Chaim. It's not what Rav Chaim Vital, but recently, in the last 10, 15 years, the real Eitz Chaim was published. And it's different, but it's almost the same. Okay. Now, one of the things that there is in Eitz Chaim and Pri Etz Chaim, both of them were written by Reb Meir Paprish, is that he also collected from other students of Rav Chaim Vital. Rav Chaim Vital didn't include, as far as I remember, he very seldom included something from someone else. And someone else had heard the Arizal or understood it this way. He seldom did that. And when you see how this process goes about, you see why it's actually very normal to do it that way. Because you have a certain picture of how you saw things, how you heard them. You don't want to... In any case. But Reb Meir Paprish did. And in Pri Etz Chaim, he brings from other students. Now, what the Tzemach Tzedek is saying is that in Pri Etz Chaim, we have this quote from another student of Rav Chaim Vital, whose name here he calls Yosef Ma'arav. That's what he calls him. Ma'arav, whenever you see Ma'arav, which means west, in Jewish history, it usually means Morocco. Yeah. It's called the Maghrib. In Arabic, you say Maghrib. Maghrib means the west. Why is it the west? Because relative to, let's say, Damascus, or relative to Iraq, it's in the west. So they call themselves the Maghrib, they call themselves the west. So there's a guy, his name is Yosef Ma'arav. Really, his name is Yosef ibn Tabun. That was his name. Tabul, sorry, with a lamed. No, Tabul.
Okay,
We're talking about 600 years after the translate. They were Ibn Tibun.
Oh.
They're different.
Okay.
Ibn Tabul, that's his name. He came from Morocco on the border of Tunisia, or something like that. I don't know if there weren't countries back then. It was in that area. Maybe today it's Algeria. I don't know.
There's still clans,
But they called him Ma'arava because he was from the west. Most of the Talmidim of the Arizal weren't from the west. They were like Rav Chaim Vital, from Damascus, from Iraq, from Eretz Yisrael, from Egypt. These were areas that were more in the east. So he was known by this name. Now a lot of people don't know that he actually had a completely separate tradition than Rav Chaim Vital. He sat with Rav Chaim Vital before the Arizal and learned from him the 18 months that he was in Sfat, the 18 critical months in which he passed over all his teachings. And he wrote down his own version of it. He didn't write it down in a book, but there were many, many manuscripts. And they're only now beginning to be published. Only now, like we're talking about 400 years afterwards. There was a rivalry between them. People don't know this. There was an actual rivalry. The rivalry was very strong. They didn't talk to each other. They were like on bad terms with one another. I don't know if this happened while they were before the Ari. I find it hard to believe that it happened then. It happened afterwards because they had a different understanding what was going on. The interesting thing is it's nothing to do with Semitic. He's just mentioning it, so I'm bringing the whole history, which is, again, it's now well known. The interesting thing is that his tradition was passed on. Ibn Tabul's tradition was passed on, and to this day there are people who identify themselves as the great grandchildren of people who learned from him.
Really? Yeah. Like a school.
And one of them, for instance, was Manitou. That's how he was known. His name was Rav Yudah Ashkenazi. Came from Algeria, and his father was the chief rabbi of Algeria, and he was a very big Zionist, and he came to Eretz Yisrael, and he brought many French Jews here, and a lot of the French that you see here that came before.
From Algeria, they would be Italian.
No, Libya was Italian.
Oh, Libya, you're right.
Algeria was French.
Algeria was French, yes.
But they were even before the French. I mean, they have their traditions from way before the French.
Yeah.
And a lot of the French-speaking francophones that you'll find here in Eretz Yisrael and in other places were students. These are the ones that came from before, let's say, 1990 or 1995. After that, it began to be mixed pot of different types of Jews that speak French. But back then, it was mostly his students. There were thousands and thousands of them. And his father, and then he comes from a family that was very much connected to Rabbi Yosef ibn Tabul. And today, living with us are two people who were his big students, who really learned a lot from him, who are younger. And one of them, his name is El Fassi. El Fassi means that he's from Fez, which means he's Moroccan. And he studied with him for many, many years. And over time, he gave him the traditions from Ibn Tabul. So he heard not just the writings, which we are yet to see because they're only being published now. They're starting to work on them on these manuscripts. But El Fassi, he gave over some of the teachings that Rav Yudah Ashkenazi gave him. And one of the interesting things you see is that the point of contention was apparently that Ibn Tabul, this Yosef Ma'arav that he mentions here, has a much more Chassidic understanding of the Arizal. Meaning, he applied it to the psyche. That's psychological. He took the Arizals and and it's very interesting because it was really a rivalry between them. It wasn't a rivalry because who's going to write it, but because Rav Chaim Vital felt that you shouldn't add this understanding into the Arizal's writings. It was no Chassidus yet. We're talking about 200 years before Chassidus. But he applied it to the nefesh, to the psyche. So here is a beautiful example of it. What's the example? He says that even though the foundation you would think is just something separate, it's just a foundation. It's not the whole. It's not the whole body. It's not everything. He says, in the same way that you see, he's hinting here towards what a person experiences. That when the sexual organs are excited, the entire body is excited. So what he's saying is that this, even though it's just foundation, understand that this carrying the whole body with it. It's taking everything with it. That's the type of thing that Rav Chaim Vital would probably never write. Because it's not the way that he saw things very technical. He didn't want to bring examples from human psychology. He didn't want to do that. But Rav Meir Paprish, who wrote Priyat Chaim, he wasn't necessarily committed to this way or that way, and he brought whatever he heard.
Yeah.
And he heard this from Ibn Tabul's students, or maybe he even met Ibn Tabul, I don't know. Could be that he even met him. And he brought it in Priyat Chaim. But this is a prime example of what the early Chassidus was like. That Ibn Tabul, and this is an incredible story. I mean, we don't know yet what Ibn Tabul is going to reveal when the writings are finally published. It's going to be very interesting.
How long ago was this? And I mean this not in a formal way, academically known. In other words, among
the academic world has
figured
figured this out only in the last 50 years.
Really?
Even less.
I mean,
even
there
less.
was no.
I don't think there was any. I'm not an expert on what they published, but
When were the first Hasidic masters aware of this?
No.
No, they weren't.
But you see that he is very aware.
Yes.
That there's from the writings of Yosef. He doesn't know. I'm sure that Tzemach Tzedek didn't even know who he was.
I got you. I understand.
It was very hard to know because if he didn't, it was very local. Like he went back to the Maghreb. He went back to Morocco or Tunisia or Algeria, wherever he was. Again, there were no countries, no states back then. But he lived there, and he went back after the Arizal passed away, and he continued his tradition there. And that's why there's these families from Algeria who studied from him.
Very interesting.
And there's a lot of this in what I think it could be that the academic world was aware that there were manuscripts that they didn't know exactly who they came from, and they saw that this is somebody who was very close to the Arizal.
Yes.
But they didn't study them and they didn't publish them, and they certainly didn't. I'm sure they didn't know. They had no inkling that this was a more psychological interpretation of the Arizal's writing. So this Ibn Tabul, Yosef Ibn Tabul, is a very, very important character. And tremendous Talmid Chacham, and also very saintly. What?
You send me later.
You can find it in Wikipedia. He's on Wikipedia now, of course.
Okay.
But the interesting thing again is to finish up with something good, that after one generation he decided, or his son decided, Yosef Ibn Tabul's son, or he himself already said it. He said, from now on, I want people to call because they call in the Sephardi world, they can name their children after themselves.
That's right.
So I want there to be a joining of our two names, Rav Chaim Vital and Yosef Ibn Tabul. So every couple of generations, or every generation even, there's somebody who's called Chaim Yosef. Chaim Vital, and he put Chaim before himself. Chaim Yosef. And so there's a lot of people in this tradition that they're called Chaim Yosef. So it's a very interesting thing.
You've met some of them.
I haven't met any, but I heard it from someone who knows.
But they're here in Yerushalayim?
Yeah, that's probably Chaim Yosef.
This is amazing stuff. I love that kind of stuff.